Yes, Miss Roxanne, is there a problem? Your mic is unmuted. You can unmute your mic and speak now. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome you all to All Pakistan Tech and Art Festival 2021, organized by GCU-ACM Student Chapter, Lahore. The title of today's webinar is Evolution of 5G in New Zealand, What's Next? This talk will provide an overview of the introduction, evolution, and development of 5G in Aotearoa, New Zealand. After discussing the what and why of 5G, this talk will also explain a number of issues related to network deployment, spectrum allocation, public perception on the availability of 5G, especially with regards to its health implications, key decision making around local and international partnerships, etc., from a typical New Zealand lens. This talk will also cover the involvement of the indigenous Maori aspirations around accessing the 5G spectrum. There will be discussion on cybersecurity concerns in relation to partnering with 5G manufacturers and the choices made by New Zealand-based network operators. Overall, this talk will give a bird's-eye view of the development and deployment of 5G in New Zealand and will close with a quick introduction to the upcoming 6G technology. Our today's guest is going to be Dr. Syed Faraz Hussain. Our guest has received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the NEA University of Engineering and Technology, Pakistan in 2008, and the PhD degree from Ulster University, UK in 2011 on the Vice Chancellor's Research Scholarship. He is currently a senior lecturer at the Department of Electrical and Mechanical Engineering, Massey University, New Zealand, where he leads the Telecommunication and Network Engineering Research Group. He was an assistant professor with Sangkong University, South Korea from 2012 to 2014 and a postdoctoral researcher with the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, South Korea from 2011 to 2012. His research interests are in the wireless networks, wave communication, energy harvesting, and passive localization. Without further ado, I'd like to call our guest, Dr. Syed Faraz Hussain, to begin with the webinar.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction. Before I start, can I confirm that you can see my screen? I have shared my screen. Can somebody please confirm that they can that it is visible to the audience?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this session. I'll start by saying that this is a distinguished speaker talk under the Distinguished Speakers Program of the Association of Computing Machinery, ACM. I'm very grateful to their support in making this event and this talk possible. Just by a way of introduction, Association of Computing Machinery is basically a community of computing professionals and students. And the overall target is to help computing professionals achieve their best and be most creative. The vision is that computing helps solve tomorrow's problem, and I'm very happy to be part of this team. Now, what are we doing today? We are going to be talking about 5G for the next hour or so. We'll have a couple of breaks in between. These breaks are in line with teaching best practices of online environments. It's highly encouraged in all teaching practices to have a few breaks, especially when we are discussing things online. But to be more honest and more frank, these breaks are going to help me more than they are going to help you. Some of you may know that New Zealand, while the rest of the world is enjoying summer, we are going through winter. And as a result of that, I happen to have a sore throat this afternoon. So these two breaks will help me refresh myself. But let's also remind ourselves that we are a mixed audience of people having interests in technology as well as arts. And even when we say technology is a very wide umbrella of things. So what I will try to do is that I will try to have a discussion that's a mix of technical and non-technical topics so that we can take everybody together. And finally, we greatly appreciate the efforts of the organizers who have brought this talk and this entire event together. I will explicitly acknowledge Hamza Sardar for his forbearance, especially with me over the past few weeks. This is our outline. We will start with the what and the why of 5G. We will formally define what 5G is. We will talk about what is happening in New Zealand within the 5G space. We will talk about who is building 5G network. And when we discuss this topic, we'll find that there are a lot of non-technical matters that also come into play when we decide which network manufacturer is going to build a given network across the country. We will find that there are considerable security concerns, especially most of them related to Huawei. We will take a look at some of the media releases that came up, and we will look at some of the reviews that were conducted as a result of that media coverage. We will talk about a number of things as we prepare to welcome 5G. We'll talk about whether it's better to have 3 or 4 or 5 5G networks in a country or one national network that can be leased to others. We'll talk about frequency allocations. We'll talk about the 3.5 gigahertz arrangement, because this is the frequency channel at which 5G is being made available, not just in New Zealand, but across the world. But eventually, a few years after, we will eventually move to higher frequency deployment. So we will also shed a bit of light on 26 gigahertz deployment and the atmospheric impact that this transmission frequency has. All of this may not be making too much sense right now, but hopefully as we start, things will come together. We will talk about the public perception of 5G. How do people view 5G? What do they think when we say 5G to them? Most of the times, technology researchers are bound within their own boundaries. They are only thinking about technology, but there is a lot that goes out in the public domain, which is also important, which sometimes even define the evolution of technology. So we will explicitly take a look at some of the health concerns, the number of cell towers that are increasing as a result of 5G, some of the applications that 5G is going to introduce. And we will also see that 5G is basically making news headlines. And I'll also point out that there is a political party which used 5G as one of their key messages. More on that a little later on. We will close this presentation with a quick look at road towards 6G. So we will see that these generations will never cease to exist. So once we have a complete grasp of 5G, we will move on to 6G and maybe then 7G and so on and so forth. So let's get started with the basics. If I have a mobile phone shown on this slide over here and I want to give you a call, my call will first go to this base station shown over here, and I will require a frequency channel in order to pass my information onto that base station. And that same information will be relayed to you again on a frequency channel. In all applications of wireless technology where information goes up and down the network, we must have frequency channels. So think of frequency channels as roads. If you want to go from point A to point B, you sit on a car and drive on the road. If there is no road, it is not possible to drive from one place to another. Similarly, frequency channels are like roads, and all wireless applications that you can think of, all of them require access to frequency channels. Here's the problem. The problem is all frequency channels are already in use by a range of different wireless services. So the problem is that we don't have any more channels left in the spectrum that we have been using over the past 40 odd years of wireless communication. Now this chart is supposed to show the frequency allocations. I'll be honest with you, I've never been able to read into this graph because of the fonts and so on. But this tells you that the entire range of frequencies that is available for wireless transmission is already occupied. which means that if we want to add more users on the network, or if we want to deploy new applications onto the network, there is simply no more space available. The network does not have enough resources to roll out new applications or to support new users. So the channels that we have been using so far, these channels are under 3 gigahertz range. All of them, as I mentioned on the previous slide, are already occupied. But the number of users that are wanting to connect to the network are constantly increasing. The applications that require transfer of data from one place to another, the number of those applications is also increasing. So what do? We move on, we move up the frequency spectrum, and we start exploring the frequency channels that are higher in transmission frequencies. The good thing about higher frequency transmission channels is that they are largely empty. Nobody is using them, and for a good reason, which I'll point out in a moment. Nobody's using them. Plenty of bandwidth is available up the spectrum. So the main idea behind 5G is that it uses high frequency bands. And if you go up the spectrum, you free up space, you free up frequency channels. And as soon as you do that, you can have more users onto the network, you can have more applications onto the network. Very easy, right? But there is one downside. There is one problem as we move from lower frequencies to higher frequency transmission. And that problem is the coverage range. As far as we are using 3 gigahertz or less than 3 gigahertz wireless signals, there is a certain range of the base station. Let's say it is 1 kilometer. Of course, it depends on terrain to terrain. It varies from environment to environment. But let's say 1 kilometer square is the area that one base station can cover if we are transmitting signals at 3 gigahertz. Now let's see what happens if we start using higher frequencies. Now this range reduces to 300 meters radius, which is the range of Wi-Fi, basically. So as a result of this reduction in coverage range, there will be inevitably some devices that will go out of coverage, that will no longer be within the coverage area of the base station. So on one hand, the good thing about 5G is that it will enable innovation, it will allow a rollout of applications, it will admit more users onto the network. But the downside is that as soon as you start using higher frequencies, your coverage range will inherently shrink. Despite that, people are interested in 5G simply because there is no more space to expand innovation. As a matter of fact, if we go back and look at all the previous generations of mobile phone technology, this is a quick table which lists 1G through to 4G. In all of the new generations that have ever come up, there is one common factor, which is data rates. Every time we introduce a new generation, that is almost always because we want higher speed, we want more users connected on to the network. And the same is true with 5G as well. 5G is also fueled by the same motivation that we want higher speed, we want more users connected to the network. Why is that? Why do we keep on wanting a higher speed connection? And the reason is that there has been significant increase witnessed in network traffic over the past several years. Now, these are the graphs taken from Ericsson report, and these are pretty old. Towards the later end of my presentation, I will show you the fresh insights as well. But from these graphs, what is painfully obvious is that the amount of data traffic is increasing considerably. The interesting thing is that mobile phone networks were launched as voice-only networks back in the 1980s. And it is not very difficult to transfer voice because it does not require a lot of data rate. It does not require a large amount of bandwidth. But over the years, the way in which networking technology has evolved is that we are witnessing more and more data-hungry applications that are increasingly being used on our mobile phones. And because data requires a larger amount of bandwidth to go from one place to another, it is essential for every new generation to provide larger networking capacity. And this has been the motivation, right? This graph starts from 2010 all through 2017. There has been an exponential increase in the data rate that users demand. And if you go further beyond that, the same trend continues. So this is until 2019, right? This projection goes up until 2019. And again, the same exponential trend keeps on increasing. And towards the later end of this presentation, I will show you fresh graphs, and you will again witness the same exponential growth in the demand from the users. And consequently, networks are constantly trying to catch up with that demand. So with this pretext, there are at least 3 expectations that we have from 5G. Essentially, there is just one expectation, and the rest of the expectations flow from that. The only expectation from 5G, from a user's perspective, is that it will support higher data rate, because this is what users are increasingly demanding. It will support a higher overall capacity, which would mean that it will allow more users to connect to the network. Now, in order for these 2 things to happen, it is essential that we use larger frequency bands at higher center frequencies. As I mentioned previously, the 3.5 or 3 gigahertz band is already full of existing applications. So if you want to increase capacity, it is essential that you go up the spectrum. And as a consequence of going up the spectrum, it will be essential that our devices use directional antennae. Because without directional antennae, high frequency transmissions cannot be enabled. These directional antennae will be expected on the base stations as well as on the devices. So 5G initially is looking at a 3.5 gigahertz spectrum. And this is the frequency range at which 5G is being deployed, not just in New Zealand, but around the world. So you will agree that this is a marginal increase in frequency, right? So previously we were using 3 gigahertz. So now from 3, we have moved on to 3.5 gigahertz. So there is a marginal increase. But the full potential of 5G will be realized as we explore considerably higher frequency channels, more than 20 gigahertz, which is expected in the near future. So far, I have tried to explain what 5G is. I've tried to explain what the motivation behind introducing 5G is. Now let's look at how 5G deployment has evolved over the years. If I ask who was the first country that launched 5G, it will be a very difficult score. The answer will depend on who you ask. The launch of 5G on a world stage has been pretty dramatic. South Korea ended up launching 5G 2 hours ahead of the United States. And obviously there was a race in becoming first to launch 5G, and in that race, South Korea beat US by 2 hours. But it doesn't end here, because Verizon from the United States came back saying that this launch of South Korea is not really a launch, because they ended up giving 5G services only to 6 celebrities across South Korea. So this is not technically a nationwide launch. So there is still a bit of struggle as to who was first launching 5G. As I said, it depends on who you ask. Launch of 5G in New Zealand has also been dramatic. 5G was launched in New Zealand by an operator called Vodafone, and they were able to launch it in December 2019. But the interesting bit is that they were never the favorites. Nobody expected Vodafone to launch 5G. What happened was that in July or August in that year, new management took over. And as a result of that new management takeover, Vodafone changed their plans, and suddenly they became the favorites, and they ended up launching 5G ahead of the other operator, which I will introduce on the next slide. Initial deployments were in the bigger cities of New Zealand, like Auckland, Christchurch, Queenstown, and Wellington. Vodafone started updating their cell sites from August 2019, and they have been using Nokia equipment in these upgrades, and there is a bit of Ericsson in the mix as well. The topic on which manufacturer is providing 5G in New Zealand is interesting, because most of New Zealand's existing telecom infrastructure is powered by Huawei, but Huawei can no longer be used, and I'll come to that in a moment. The other operator was Spark. Spark was the favorite. They were expected to launch 5G ahead of everyone else, and they had planned to launch 5G in July 2020, and Vodafone came out with theirs 6 months sooner. So if you look at some of the media coverage of the events around that time, it was very interesting. Both operators trying to make sure that they are ahead of the race. Spark went live in September 2019, and they said, we have also launched 5G. And they said that, and actually they were using 2.6 gigahertz of a spectrum. More recently, the America's Cup has used 5G extensively. So America's Cup is a sailing competition in which the New Zealand team also participated, and they were powered by 5G. With the help of 5G, people who were viewing at home had access to a lot more information about the sailing conditions than they would originally have. Finally, the third operator in New Zealand is 2degrees. 2degrees is still finding its way into the 5G space. They are expecting to launch their 5G services by the end of this year, and they are targeting Auckland and Wellington, the major cities in the country. They partner very frequently with Vodafone, especially for providing services in rural areas where it is typically difficult, more expensive to deploy a standalone network. New Zealand has a partnership called the Rural Connectivity Group, in which all operators come together and they provide services using each other's infrastructure. Now, these were the operators, the three operators who will end up operating the 5G network. Now, let's ask the question, who is building 5G in New Zealand? Initially, when Spark was the favorite to launch 5G, the idea was to use Huawei devices. And that was pretty natural because, as I said, most of the underlying infrastructure in New Zealand is based on Huawei. However, that idea was rejected by New Zealand government back in December 2018. And that was a result of some cybersecurity concerns that were raised with regards to Huawei equipment. In the UK, there is a Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Center. They publish an annual report, and in their 2019 report, they highlighted a number of vulnerabilities in Huawei devices when they tested 4G and pre-4G devices. And that report was widely cited as one of the reasons why Huawei is not fit to deploy 5G, because there are a number of problems with their security provisions. The same HCSEC, they published another report in 2020. They may have published in 2021. I'm not familiar with that. And similar concerns have been raised. However, if you look at that report, it is largely vague on detail. It says that there are vulnerabilities, but it doesn't pinpoint exactly what the problem is. At least this is the stance that Huawei took. Okay, this is the problem with your equipment, and this is what they came back with. They said that it is pretty vague on detail. It hasn't tested 5G devices. It has actually tested 4G devices. And most of the problems that were explained in slightly more detail were related to software engineering. The issue of binary equivalence was one of the main concerns, which loosely means that if there are two routers from Huawei, technically both of them should perform the same way, have the same level of performance, but they were not binary equivalent. All devices were not performing in the same way. So this was one problem. The other problem was cryptographic solution was weak. The other problem was third party was also involved. There has been a recent cyber attack on New Zealand's Reserve Bank, which also had the same problem. They were also using a third party equipment. And as a result of that, the attack from outside was successful. Now, these are some of the problems that were highlighted about Huawei, but there were at least at that time open-ended questions around what is the scale of these problems, how much time will Huawei take to fix all this. But anyway, the report was enough for a number of countries to go against Huawei while deploying their particular 5G networks. New Zealand was in more trouble, as I said, because Huawei and New Zealand have had a very good connection in the past. And it was also unclear how this ban is going to take effect. Because if you ban 5G devices, 5G is not going to be a standalone system. It will build on the 3G and the 4G system, which will anyway have Huawei devices installed from before. So the question remained, how are we going to ban just 5G devices? What are we going to do with the Huawei devices that are already in our infrastructure? Other countries also had similar problems. The UK and the United States, they also had a similar problem. They also had Huawei devices in their underlying network, but they decided to get rid of all those devices, replace it with some other manufacturer. So then that raises the question of economy and finance and how expensive this proposition is, especially for a country like New Zealand. New Zealand is not a large economy. So far, to the best of my knowledge, New Zealand has rejected the idea of getting rid of Huawei devices that are already in there, but they are also refraining from adding Huawei devices onto the network. Moving on, how many networks do we need? There are 3 network operators in New Zealand. Do we need a 5G network for each of those 3 operators? Or do we build just one 5G network that would then be leased to others? Some in the United States a long time ago argued to build a single wholesale 5G network, right? But that idea was very quickly shut down. Here in New Zealand, this idea was also propagated, but it didn't work quite like that. And much like the rest of the world, for example, China had at least 3 deployments of 5G until 2019. China Mobile, China Telecom, China Unicom, all 3 of them having one 5G network across the country. We are witnessing different operators having their it was reported that China had 30,000 5G base stations, or they were planning to install all of these by the end of that year. And this was going to be one of the largest 5G networks in the world. So what we have done so far is that we have taken a look at what 5G is. We have tried to define it. We have tried to look at the motivation for it. And we have tried to look at some of the underlying principles around the deployment of 5G technology. So how about we take a very quick 5-minute break? Please use this time to look away from the screen, stretch yourself up, and in 5 minutes, we'll come back and we will continue our discussion, and we will start looking at the spectrum that is available for the deployment of 5G. I'm going to turn my video off temporarily, and 5 minutes later, I'll restart this lecture. In the interim, when we come back from the break, if you have any questions, you can start speaking now. Otherwise, we will hopefully have some time at the end of this lecture for questions. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. And we are back. Let's continue our discussion on 5G from where we left. We will start talking about the frequency spectrum of 5G now. If anyone has any questions, you may speak up now. Otherwise, I'll continue and finish this lecture, and then we will have Q&A at the end. Right. As I said, sorry, go ahead.
Ms. Khadija, you are allowed to speak. If you want to speak, turn on your mic and ask your question. Okay, sir, we think you can continue. Maybe she has raised hand mistakenly.
No, that's quite all right. And we will still have, hopefully, some time at the end for questions. As I was saying, 5G was launched in the 3.5 gigahertz band. This is a breakdown of 3.5 gigahertz band. This is a frequency on access. And you will also recall I was talking about Vodafone, Spark, and other operators. Some of them are here. As you can see, Vodafone already had considerable chunk of the spectrum in the 3.5 gigahertz domain, which is why it was easy for them to make plans and come up with a deployment of their own. You will see Spark, that's also here. But as you can see, the overall spectrum is not considerably large. The rights of these bands expired in 2020, and the government was required to come up with a new allocation of the rights towards these bands, so these could be used for deploying 5G. As they considered allocation of this spectrum, they also looked at what kind of bandwidths must be made available for 5G. On one hand, if you use large bandwidths, that will reduce complexity and the duration of the allocation process, so it will be quicker for the government to allocate the spectrum because each chunk is considerably large. But at the same time, if you use large bandwidths, it will be a barrier for some of the potential participants or smaller operators. Because remember, bandwidth is an extremely expensive resource. So while trading off these two issues, the idea here, at least in New Zealand, with regards to 3.5 deployment, is to use 20 megahertz in the 3 to 6 gigahertz range, and then use much higher frequency bandwidths up to 100 megahertz when we move to deploying the 24 gigahertz plus networks. Now, these bandwidths require frames to carry information from one place to another. This is configuration number 2 of TDD deployment. We very frequently discuss this when we discuss concepts like LTE. In a time division duplexing system, the mobile device and the base station are allocated different times of transmitting their information. For example, all the dark shaded subframes is the time duration for which the base station is going to transmit. And all the lightly shaded ones is the time duration in which the mobile phones are going to convey their information. So this is how we have used TDD in order to allow almost bidirectional communication between mobile phones and the base stations. The similar concept is adopted in the 5G networks as well. As you can see, there is some amount of time available for downlink transmission, some amount of time available for downlink, and there are instances in which uplink transmission is enabled. Looking at this breakdown of distribution of time resources, it is obvious that we are giving a higher amount of resource for downlink because it is abundantly evident that we download more as compared to what we upload. We download heaps of data and we upload, but not equally as much, which is why there is more emphasis on having a higher number of resources on the downlink side of it. So this is when we are talking about 3.5 gigahertz deployment. but there is progress that is being made on the 26 gigahertz deployment as well. Around the world, countries are already looking at auctioning and making this kind of a spectrum available. Different countries are using different frequency bands. The US is looking at 28 and 39 gigahertz. Europe is looking at 26 and 35 gigahertz. Similarly, South Korea is also making strides. There is considerable work being done in France. There are 5G trials taking place in the 26 gigahertz band, and so on and so forth. Hopefully, towards the end of this presentation, I can add more to who is doing what in the present state of the art. Here in New Zealand, if we look at the 26 gigahertz band, you will find that it is almost entirely dominated by Vodafone. So Vodafone is still in a very good position if they would want to deploy 5G in this higher frequency range. The rights of this spectrum, they are expiring in October 2022. Also, the upper band, so this is going up to 20.05 gigahertz, right? And from here, the spectrum is starting from 26.4 and so on. So most of this spectrum is available for 5G deployment. This is what I said right at the beginning, that if we do not have frequency channels available on the lower end of the spectrum, we can always move up because there is plenty of space available. And in New Zealand, and I'm pretty sure elsewhere around the world, there is plenty of space in which you can explore the deployment of 5G. But that comes with a massive problem. One of the problems was the range limitation. As you will recall, the range will shrink if we start using higher frequency spectrum. The other problem is that high frequency transmissions also have an atmospheric impact. If it starts raining very heavily, that rainfall is going to affect the propagation characteristics of higher frequency signals, which would mean that in countries like New Zealand, where it rains almost always, 5G will be ineffective from the looks of it. On the left-hand side is a research reported in 2013. This paper over here, it is very widely cited to fully understand how millimeter waves or 5G high frequency waves are going to behave. And we find that the radius is no more than 200 meters, which is considerably small compared to what you would have in 4G or 3G and so on and so forth. 5G often messes with weather forecasts. An increase in the content of water vapor is a feature which is very carefully examined because the information that comes out can predict the weather trends in a country. So I'll read this one out. The water vapor molecules create a characteristic broad peak at 22 gigahertz. Now this is the frequency at which the people who forecast weathers look for information to predict what is going to happen with weather moving forward. In New Zealand, 23.8 gigahertz is the frequency channel which is used in order to make predictions about weather. Now, I'm not a weather expert, I must say, as you would already know, but I know that if this frequency channel is messed with by 5G transmissions that are also going to take place in nearby vicinity, then there will be problems in being able to predict weather trends. So 5G unwanted emissions must be prevented from affecting this 23.8 gigahertz channel if we ever want to predict weather appropriately. For a small country like New Zealand, which is an island country, weather is extremely important. Just as we speak, South Auckland, a region in Auckland, is reeling from the effect of a tornado that hit earlier in the day. So understanding weather is extremely important for every country, and more importantly for New Zealand. So this is where 5G spectrum is starting, and this is where our weather channel is. So it is essentially really important that there is no leakage that takes place between these two frequencies. This became a massive issue in New Zealand, and the Met Service was called into Parliament to explain all of this, whether there will be implications on them being able to predict whether or not as a result of launching 5G. So it became a massive spectacle here in New Zealand. Having said that, though, please recall that we are still deploying 5G in the 3.5 gigahertz range, so we are still far, far away from high frequency deployment. Having said that, it is important to explore these issues because eventually we will come towards high frequency deployments. So we have spoken about frequency spectra that will be available or that is still available for 5G deployment. Let's talk about what 5G will do. What are some of the emerging applications that 5G is going to realize? Now, going back to the beginning of this lecture, I said that we are always interested in exploring technologies that can increase data rate, which would mean that if I have a 5G connection, I'll be able to download a movie in under a second. It is a use case, but all this effort, all this innovation, all this research and development must not be restricted just in the ability of downloading a movie under a second. And this is what I've been advocating here in New Zealand, and I speak with media, that we need to expand our horizon and see what 5G can really do. And Stuff reported in New Zealand that they are trialing carrying out eye examination of a patient located within the 5G coverage in the Dunedin Hospital from the Sparks head office in Auckland. So the patient is sitting in Dunedin, and the patient's eye is being examined over a 5G connection in Auckland. So this is some of the emerging applications that we are gradually aspiring towards. And as you would imagine, the operators who are deploying a 5G network, they are also very keen on promoting 5G, and they always sponsor content that appears in newspapers about how great 5G is and what applications it is going to support. So on one hand, there are fascinating new applications that are coming out, but then there is the other side of the story as well, which is how badly does it affect human well-being? There are passionate arguments on both sides. Some believe that 5G is safe, some say that it isn't. There are at least three major concerns. The first is that we don't know how high frequency 5G waves is going to affect human well-being. There are also concerns that there will be far too many cell towers as compared to what we have today, which stems from the fact that the coverage range of the base station will reduce. Coverage range of a base station is 1 kilometer radius, for example. If we replace it with 5G, it will shrink to 300 meters, which would mean that the area which was previously covered by one base station will require 3 base stations. So the number of cell towers will increase, and there are underlying security and privacy concerns, which are always associated with all forms of wireless transmission. One of the big issues, one of the ones that is highlighted very frequently, is that high frequency transmission has never been tested. It has never been used for large scale mobile phone communication, right? So if something has never been tested, it shouldn't be used, is the argument which is presented. On the other hand, there are counter arguments as well. One of the counter argument that always comes up is if we increase transmission frequency, then penetration of that signal into human body will actually decrease. So you are absorbing more radiation if you're using 4G as compared to what you would in 5G. This is not the end of the story because there are way too much to cover on this topic. I'm just trying to summarize the main things. So in a world where both sides of arguments exist, the question is, who do you believe? And to answer that, most people refer to what large organizations who are responsible for maintaining health and well-being are saying. The World Health Organization and others, they say that 5G is still safe. The radiation limits are under control, but of course there are others who believe otherwise. One of the strongest argument that is being advocated by network operators, and this one is a sponsored content by Vodafone, is that 5G is non-ionizing radiation, which means that it does not have enough energy to destabilize human body or a small part of human body, as compared to ionizing radiation that is detrimental to human well-being, which would mean that the radiation from the sun is more dangerous or potentially more dangerous than 5G, because that radiation is within the ionizing side of the spectrum, which means that it has energy, enough energy to destabilize a part of human body. If we look at actual classifications, World Health Organization has classified electromagnetic fields, wireless signals that we use, as possibly carcinogenic. They can possibly cause cancer. Now, possibly carcinogenic is a category which is milder in effect as compared to probably carcinogenic. Possibly carcinogenic, from memory, is category 2B. The effect of 2B is smaller than the effect of 2A, which is probably carcinogenic. And some of the activities, therefore, that are more dangerous than 5G transmissions or electromagnetic fields is activities that we do in our daily life, frying and emissions from high temperature, consuming meat, and having a hot cup of tea or coffee and so on. So all these things, according to World Health Organization, are more harmful than electromagnetic fields. If we focus on 5G, then there has been evidence in the literature that millimeter waves can cause permanent damage to the skin. Why skin? Because as we increase the transmission frequency, the ability of the signals to penetrate into human body reduces. And as a result of that, most of the signal that hits human body gets reflected off the surface, which means that a lot of it is incident on the human skin and therefore affecting human skin. Especially pulsed radiation, burst of data that is transmitted over a short period of time, is found to have a more adverse effect. As a result of these findings, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Potential has revised their standards in 2019. They have given more significance to the effect of signals bouncing off the skin, and as a result of that, they have modified some of the criteria that operators must meet before they roll out their 5G network. In New Zealand, the position of the government is that 5G is safe. The New Zealand government, they have pointed out to the fact that signal intensity is more important factor to determine adversity rather than transmission frequency, which means that the argument that higher transmission frequency will cause more damage does not hold, because if the signal intensity is smaller, that would mean that the damage is not going to be considerable. In New Zealand, we operate at 50 times below the thresholds that are recommended for safe usage. So government position in New Zealand is that it is largely safe. But that doesn't stop bad headlines from popping up every now and again. In the past 2 years, we have seen considerable attacks on 5G towers across New Zealand. So this is a headline: 5G cell towers swoosh, residents fight Spark. Spark is the network operator over plans. And then there is this headline: another area in New Zealand where protesters created blockade at 2 cell towers, again by Spark. So it's interesting to note the date. So this is going back to July, this is going back to August, and the target is a Spark, because as I said, Spark were favorites to launch 5G in New Zealand. But when things changed, when Vodafone made the call that they are also deploying 5G, then there were protests against Vodafone as well. So this one is dating back to October the 22nd, after Vodafone decided that they are also jumping into the game. These headlines are obviously representing groups of communities, people who are expressing their concerns against 5G. And these concerns went upstairs. These concerns went all the way up to, for example, the local government in New Zealand. In this news, for example, the councillors of Gisborne went through an exercise of listening to the people about what concerns they had. And there was, for a small amount of time, a political party which also fought the election that took place in 2020, the national elections that took place in 2020. And one of the things that they were campaigning against is 5G causing cancer. So there is a lot to digest on the public perception side of 5G. And in the time that we had, I have very briefly brought some of this to your attention. So I can go to a 5-minute break. I'm not sure if it will be a good idea. I think I'm already running out of time. So I'll skip this break and I'll continue on. I have just a few more slides to show, and then we will finish and hopefully have some time for questions. If you are desperate for a break, I'm happy to have one. Please feel free to speak out if that is the case. Otherwise, I'm continuing. Towards the end of my presentation, I'm interested more in introducing what is next. Obviously, if 5G is out, then 6G is next. And after that, you can imagine 7 and 8 and 9 and 10Gs will also follow. If we look at the trends, it looks like every decade has a generation of its own. We started in the 1980s with 1G. In the 1990s, we had 2G, and so on and so forth. So by that logic, we are expecting 6G to come out in the decade starting 2030. Now, whatever you know about 5G, if you multiply all that by a factor of 10, that will be 6G. The data rates in 6G are in the order of 1 terabits per second, which is roughly 10 times that what we are hoping from 5G. The delay is 1 microsecond. If 5G is exploring frequency bands in gigahertz, like I've mentioned over here, 5G is talking about using frequency bands in gigahertz, then obviously 6G is talking about frequency bands in terahertz range. Now, the interesting thing about terahertz range is that there are some channels that are actually pretty good. For example, these channels expressed in gigahertz, but these can be interpreted as terahertz channels as well. And over these channels, the attenuation is small. But again, there are some channels where signal propagation is not considerably good. So all these considerations are gradually coming up. To the best of my knowledge, we still do not have a frequency channel which will be used for 5G. There are indications, but these haven't been finalized yet as far as I know. This is a potential roadmap. So we are over here, right? So we are roughly in 2021, and everything has on the left-hand side has already happened. In 2018, when we were essentially starting the deployment of 5G, the world was already researching and exploring 6G. So this is how fast the change in the process and the change of technology is. Roughly in 2018, the 6G flagship project was launched in 5G, in 6G. And ever since that, all countries, one after the other, have lined up to have their own mark on the development of 6G. The United States, China, Japan, South Korea, all of them are gradually one by one making strides towards 6G. So why on earth do we need 6G? The answer is the same that I gave you at the beginning of the lecture, because the data rates, the trends in the user demands continue to increase. These are some of the graphs that I showed you on a previous slide, right? And I said that I'll be showing you the fresher results. So there we are. Now, these results are projections, of course, of the traffic that we are going to expect, and this is going up to 2030. And as you can see, that exponential trend continues to grow. So if this user demand continues to grow, it will always be important for the network to catch up with that user demand, which is why people are looking at 6G, because the expectation is that the user demand will have increased considerably in the decade starting 2030. Now, this is a very quick comparison of aspirations between 5G and 6G. The outer graph in blue color that represents 6G, which is coming our way a little later on, and the graph in red is 5G. And as I said, it is the difference between the two is a factor of 10 in most cases. What is very interesting is, although you can look at it and debate on it, of course, there's plenty of content on the slide, but I'd very explicitly mention the positioning accuracy side of it. Mobile phone networks have never been invented to locate mobile phones. Location is important as far as diverting a phone call is concerned, but fine-grained localization, there are separate networks that do it. But as we are making more and more progress towards 5G and 6G, that positioning feature is also becoming a part and parcel of mobile phone networks. So the expectation is that the positioning accuracy will increase even further as we get closer to the 6G side of it. So with all this, let me close this lecture by saying just two quick things. The first is that the introduction of new generations of mobile phone technology will keep taking place because all of them are largely motivated by increased user demand. As long as the user demand is increasing, we will have newer Gs arriving. The other point that I'd like to make, I've already made it, I'd like to reinforce that the technology must help in solving real problems. And as far as 5G and 6G are concerned, if they are put to good use, if they are put to use that helps society in a meaningful way, that is, all the effort will then be paid off. With this, I thank you very much for listening, and I am happy to take any of your questions.
Once again, if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand. We will allow your mic, and then you can unmute your mic and ask a question. Ms. Khadija, your mic is allowed.
Thank you very much for joining us. This is Muhammad Hafiz, advisor, GCU-ACM Student Chapter. And on behalf of Department of Computer Science and GCU-ACM Student Chapter, I welcome you, and I'm very thankful to you for your presence. My question is, you were talking about signal frequency and signal intensity. So if the New Zealand government thinks that signal intensity, you can play on that and allow the 5G on the basis of signal intensity and ignore signal frequency. What does it mean? I just wouldn't understand. Please elaborate.
Sure. Alaikum salam, Hafiz. Thank you for having me. It's always a great pleasure talking at these events. So signal frequency is the frequency, simply the frequency of the signal, right? This is 2.4 gigahertz. Let's say this is the frequency of Wi-Fi that some of you will be using. And then there is a transmit power, the power that is contained within the signal, which is tuned at frequency 2.4 gigahertz. So what is that transmit power? This transmit power is expressed in terms of watt per meter square. If we are talking about 5G or 6G networks, then we are looking at a maximum of 10 watts per meter square. So you can think of intensity as power density. So this is the amount of power that you are spreading over a given area. The other way of expressing this is in terms of, sorry, not 10, 6 watts per kg. So this is the amount of power that a kilogram of tissue of a human body is absorbing. So if you are interested in absorption, then signal intensity is expressed in SAR, which is expressed like this. if you are interested in determining the amount of power spread over an area, if you want to express signal intensity in that way, then that will be known as power density, and the maximum allowed is 10 watts per meter square. Does that answer your question? Please feel free for a follow-up, right?
If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. We will allow your mic and then you can ask your question by unmuting your mic.
Sir, can you give a broader viewpoint about 6G?
A broader viewpoint about 6G. For that, I'd like to go back to this slide, and I will say that that some of the features that 6G has are listed over here. I will also note that these are very high-level aspirations at this stage, because most of the world is still grappling with the deployment of 5G. So I believe that once we have passed that stage, especially the higher frequency of 5G, after we have handled all of that, then we will probably think a little more concretely about 6G. At this stage, it is still largely vague, but to have a perspective, I think it is advisable to think of a tenfold advanced version of 5G, which will later be dubbed as 6D. I have already pointed out the positioning accuracy. Let me take this opportunity to point out connectivity density. So in 5G, we are expecting to have 1 million devices per square kilometers. That's a lot of devices in a given area, in 1 square kilometers. And with 6G, these number of devices will increase to 10 million per square kilometers. And the question around the health and safety and well-being and power intensity and so on and so forth will become more important, because we will have more devices in our immediate vicinity. Although we are having more devices in our immediate vicinity, the other side of the story is that each of these devices will be transmitting at a considerably smaller transmit power as compared to our traditional base station. So to sum it up, we can talk about all these features at great length, but because these are still high-level aspirations, I don't want to say too much. I can, of course, point you to this paper over here, which is a very detailed survey on the upcoming 6G technology.
Sir, my next question is, you were talking about there's a triangle of government and private companies who are currently owning 5G spectrum and the people's health. So if these companies would implement these frequencies, and if they would affect the environment, wouldn't it be lethal for us? Like right now we have the pandemic, and certainly we're not aware what is the cause of this pandemic. So we would have some other kind of diseases due to these emerging technologies. So what the scientists say about these things?
Yes, fair enough. Actually, it is even more interesting. I remember talking to a journalist who wanted to know whether COVID-19 is caused by 5G. and I was on a radio interview a while ago, and the interview started with the presenter asking me, "Does 5G kill bees?" So all that is obviously out there, and one of the reasons that there is a lot of scientists who believe that there are health adversaries, which is what I was saying when I was discussing health side of it, is that there are arguments on both sides of it. There are scientists on both sides of it. Now, what most of the people are doing is that they are relying on the information that they are receiving from bigger organizations like the WHO, like ICN, IRP, like the governments of their countries. And using that as the basis, they are going ahead with the deployment of 5G. This is obviously upsetting some people, as a result of which there are protests, as I mentioned in my presentation. But that is not stopping that's not stopping the governments or the operators from going ahead with 5G deployment. I think a lot of people are trusting what they are told by bigger organizations who do not have a strong evidence against 5G or wireless technology in general.
So this is a bit more personal. So have you taken side, or are you still skeptical about the 5G and its effect on the health?
In my review of the literature, I haven't been able to find a strong set of literature that says that 5G is bad. I'm always happy to learn new things, but so far there are one or two papers here and there. One of my colleagues in a different college sent me a paper on 5G causing coronavirus, and that paper was picked up on headlines here and there as well. And I wrote to I think I can't remember it correctly, but I think I ended up writing to the Science Media Center of New Zealand that the underlying science was quite weak. And that happens with a lot of papers. There are big headlines that are very captivating, that people are routinely attracted to. But deep down in most of the literature that I've seen, there is always one or two or three or four things that do not add up, which then calls into question the entire contribution of that particular publication. So, as far as I can tell, based on my own very humble review of the literature, there is not evidence to support that that 5G causes the health adversities that people are talking about. As long as, and this is the key, as long as the international standards are adhered to. Look, wireless transmission is energy that at the end of the day interacts with human body. So if the intensity in that signal is extremely high, then that wireless signal is going to cook you up. That is how microwave ovens work. They also use the same frequency as Wi-Fi roughly, but because they are so intense, they have a lot of heat and they can cook the processed material. In fact, you can try it out. Try using your microwave oven, and in the close vicinity, try operating your Wi-Fi. You will see that the microwave oven will interfere with Wi-Fi because the intensity used in an oven is considerably high. So as long as intensity, or as long as the limitations imposed by organizations are adhered to, there is very little evidence that damage will be caused. I did mention a couple of papers from 2018 in one of my previous slides, which pointed out to the fact that there are thermal effects that are taking place as a result of 5G transmissions. And as a result of that and other literature in 2019, some of the boundaries, some of the limitations related to signal exposure were revised. And those revised versions are now being used for deploying 5G around the world.
So my next question is regarding economics. since you were talking about in 5G and 6G, there are very few safe channels, like 2 or 3. And if the big companies own those channels, wouldn't be monopoly, and some hands would be like controlling everything in the 5G and 6G world.
Yes, allocation of a spectrum is extremely interesting. The way it works is that at the beginning, the government of the day would open the spectrum for auctioning, and then operators will submit their bids. This is the amount of money that we are willing to pay for this much spectrum, and so on and so forth. And that auction process completes itself, and then every operator knows what they have gotten from the government. The role of the government in all of this is to regulate competition. This is one of the responsibilities that governments around the world have, to make sure that the smaller operators also come into play. In New Zealand, this auction process takes place. But this year, because of COVID-19, we were in lockdown. The entire world was in lockdown, so it was very difficult to run that process. So as a result of that, fixed spectrum was given away to the operators that were available. So from memory, 60 megahertz each was given to the 3 main operators, and there is a smaller operator operating in the South Island by the name of Densia. They also got, I think, 40 megahertz. And then there is an indigenous population here in New Zealand, people who are the indigenous countrymen. They are called the Maori people. They also have interest in 5G, and they also ended up having, I think, again from memory, 50 megahertz worth of a spectrum. So in order to prevent one organization to control everything, it is at the end of the day the job of the government to ensure that fair competition proceeds. And I have, in the past couple of minutes, tried to explain to you how this process works in New Zealand and how it has unfolded this year in the midst of COVID-19. The numbers that I've mentioned, 60 megahertz and 50 megahertz and so on, this is from memory, so don't quote me on that. I was just trying to give you an impression of how the auction process works in order to regulate the market, in order to get rid of monopoly, as you just mentioned.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Adnan, your mic is allowed. You can unmute and ask the question. I don't think there are any more questions. So you can conclude the talk if you want to.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. It has been very nice talking to you. Although I'm still not used to talking to an empty room and having people listening to me virtually, but hopefully it has been a nice experience for you. It was wonderful talking to all of you. I thank you again, especially the organizers, for facilitating this. Thank you and all the best.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Sure.
Sir, one last question from the students. If someone wants to study in the New Zealand, how can they come on scholarships and different study programs? This is from the students.
Sure. All universities in New Zealand, there are 6 universities in New Zealand, all of which have a scholarship round that is advertised on their university pages every year. Because of COVID-19, New Zealand currently, as far as I know, is not accepting international students for the foreseeable future. But hopefully, as things ease down, that border restriction will go away, and international students will be able to apply. I strongly encourage you to take a look at all the universities in New Zealand and take a look at the deadlines that are in place for making applications. If you are wanting to study towards a PhD, things are slightly easier in that there are more scholarship opportunities available. If you are wanting to study towards a master's degree, then things are slightly difficult, because if you come to study as a PhD student, you are treated on the same fee as a domestic student. Whereas if you come to do a master's, then the international fees apply, which is quite considerable, quite hefty. And the scholarships on the master's side are also not in abundance. So New Zealand, I imagine, is a good place to explore for PhD research. Good thing, the best way to approach it is to get in touch with a potential supervisor who would want to work with you on your thesis. If you have support from a supervisor, then the rest of the things are slightly easy. Now, when I say this, I don't want to increase a lot of hopes, because having been here and having seen all the admission process, I can tell you that competition on scholarships is extremely fierce. I don't want to discourage you, of course, but what I'm saying is that you need to use your student years very wisely in order to, at the end, have a very strong scholarship application that stands out from the crowd. Now, one way of doing that is to make sure that you have good grades, obviously, and more importantly, try to see if you can have some element of research in your CV. Very often, in fact, at Massey, the admission form would have a checkbox which you need to check whether you have done research in your undergraduate or previous studies or not. And that checkbox becomes very important, mostly because competition is very heavy, and people who do not have prior research experience are inevitably disadvantaged compared to people who are coming in with 3 or 4 publications already. So I'd recommend very strongly to think about how you can strengthen your scholarship application, not after graduation, but actually during graduation, especially in your 3rd year and your 4th year. This is the time when you need to start thinking about what your scholarship application will look like. And with all that background work in place, inshallah, things will work out.
One last question from
Sure.
our side. What kind of research you are working right now?
My own area is 5G slash 6G, device-to-device communication, relaying, energy harvesting, wireless positioning, and more recently, autonomous vehicles.
Okay, sir. That's all from our side. Sir Hafiz, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for your information and for your great knowledge. It was a very helpful session, especially for the graduate students and for the research students. It was a great session. And thank you for telling us the procedure of preparing the CV and getting into research at the earliest stage. So on your behalf, I encourage everyone to be part of research as soon as possible. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for having me, and you have a good one. Catch you later.
Alright, now we have a few messages from our proud collaborators that I'd like to display. first partner that we have is IEEE UCET IUB Student Branch. The IEEE UCET IUB Student Branch established in April 2010, having 6 technical chapters and 1 affinity group. It has been working efficiently for the last 10 years and now has become the most prominent student branch in not only Pakistan, but has achieved a distinguished position globally as well. It has won multiple distinguished awards, including the IEEE R10 SAC Best Student of the Month and R10 Student Branch of the Month, and most importantly, due to its tireless efforts and continuous struggle, it has achieved the historic feat of winning all the 8 categories of awards at IEEE Lahore Section AGM 2019 and 20 plus members loyalty awards at first AGM of IEEE Bahawalpur subsection 2020. IEEE UCET-IUB has won multiple international grants and funds from which it has been able to conduct many informative seminars and webinars and organize different mega events, and has also been able to carry out colossal projects as well. It aims at providing a beneficial and amiable environment through its best practices and continues to work for the betterment of humanity through its welfare projects. Next, we have IEEE Computer Society ComStats Islamabad Chapter. The IEEE Computer Society ComStats University Islamabad provides a forum for people in computer science and engineering domains, allowing them to empower their grasp on the technological aspects of their industry. Along with enhancing the literary and practical skills, the society gives its members a platform to improve their professional capabilities by providing constant learning opportunities. IEEE CSCUI has a history of collaborating with top technical organizations and communities nationally as well as internationally. A few of their recent collaborations include Facebook Developer Circle, GDG Islamabad, GDG Cloud Islamabad, Startup Grind, Dev, British Council, Red Bull Basement, Microsoft Learn Student Ambassadors Islamabad, Thumbprint 5S Creative Agency, Infinity OPEX, Scott Solutions LLC, and Enhance International Group. Now, shortly we will be having our next virtual workshop which is titled Secure Content Sharing in Microsoft 365. It will begin at 3:30 and I encourage you all to stay on the same link as it will begin soon. I will now display the attendance slide. Please